Welcome to Squared Away Life. My name is Camden Busey. Today we're working through chapter 7 of my forthcoming book, The Compounding Mind. We come to the chapter, The Mechanics of Time Horizons. Now, what I want to speak about today is really just this core practice of my daily review. And this is what the whole book is built around. The daily review is deceptively simple. And each morning you read notes from 3 specific points in your past. 1 week ago, 1 month ago, and 1 year ago. That's it. It's just a few minutes of reading what you captured at those 3 moments in time. But this simplicity conceals remarkable power. By consistently encountering your past self at these 3 distances, you create a form of temporal awareness that's difficult to achieve any other way. You're not just remembering, for example, you're actually systematically observing yourself across time, seeing patterns that only become visible when you look back from multiple vantage points. Now, the mechanism is straightforward. You capture notes as life unfolds, and then the system automatically surfaces them at these predetermined intervals. And what you wrote on the same day last week now appears to you today. What you captured last month reappears now, and what you documented last year and every year before that returns to your attention. This creates a conversation between your past and your present selves. Now, you're not a different person, but in a sense, you kind of are because you see things different. And this conversation reveals insights that neither version of yourself, your younger or your older, could see on their own. Now, why would we want to use these 3 time horizons? Well, each time frame serves a specific psychological and practical purpose. When you look at your notes from 1 week ago, they are fresh enough to remember your context, but they're distant now enough so that you can start to see some patterns and have some perspective. Why would you want to look at your notes from 1 month ago? Well, they show medium-term progress on some bigger projects and bigger things you're thinking about, but they also start to surface some recurring cycles. And then your notes from 1 year ago and prior, every year before that, they reveal transformation. They demonstrate larger scale growth and long-term patterns. Now, together, they create a temporal parallax. You can see your life from multiple angles simultaneously. Now, reading notes from exactly 7 days ago provides immediate continuity with your recent commitments and your decisions. You can see what you committed to last week, and you can assess whether those commitments were kept, adjusted, or even abandoned. You notice which problems have resolved themselves and which are still demanding attention. And you identify what's still pending. You might have remembered that you have some tasks or decisions or conversations that haven't moved forward since last week. And then you can decide whether they still matter or whether they should be released or let go. And you begin to catch patterns also as they emerge, seeing the early signals of trends before they become fully established. Now, the weekly review also delivers rapid feedback on your judgment and your approach. When you're looking at notes from 1 week ago, you can evaluate which approaches actually worked when you're testing things out versus which ones seemed promising but then ultimately failed in practice. You see which predictions also proved accurate and which revealed some blind spots in your own thinking. And you notice where you overestimated, where you underestimated. That is, whether you allocated too much time, too little energy, or you misjudged the difficulty of a challenge entirely. Now, perhaps most valuably, the weekly horizon reveals your energy patterns with remarkable clarity. You can see how your energy actually cycles week to week. Not how you think it should cycle, but how it actually does. And you start to identify which days are consistently productive and which tend to drain you, often discovering patterns you'd never consciously recognized. You understand what depletes you and what energizes you, creating the self-knowledge that's necessary to design your weeks intentionally rather than reactively. Now, when reviewing your weekly notes or your notes from 1 week ago, you need to consider some questions like, how do I feel about this issue now versus then? Or did this urgent matter actually turn out to be important? Sometimes the most powerful prompt is simply, what would I tell last week me? Well, let's take a look and consider now the monthly horizon. This is more like medium term learning. Well, the month ago review, the review of your notes that were written exactly 1 month ago, reveals the arc of your recent efforts and your experiments. You can see what you were building toward a month ago, like the projects or maybe the relationships you were developing, the capabilities that you were investing in, things you're trying to learn. And then you can assess whether those investments are paying off. You notice which initiatives actually gained traction and which stalled despite your initial enthusiasm. You identify what fell by the wayside and can honestly evaluate whether it should have or whether something valuable was accidentally abandoned in the rush of daily demands. I'm very surprised often how things from not only a week ago, but also a month ago, especially, just I forgot about. Just things I thought were really important at the time, and they're just not important anymore. The monthly distance really kind of surfaces your emotional seasons with clarity. You can recall what your overall state was a month ago, not just isolated moments, but your prevailing mood and the mindset during that period. And you see which patterns persisted through the entire month and which started to dissipate kind of on their own. And that, I think, reveals what deserves sustained attention versus what was temporary turbulence. You get caught up in the moment. You need some perspective. And when you're looking at things a month ago, you have that. You recognize how your priorities have shifted, often discovering that what felt urgent a month ago has really become irrelevant, while quieter concerns may have grown into a central focus. Now, perhaps most importantly, the monthly review shows you the results of your short term experiments, whatever they may be. You can evaluate what you were trying then and see what outcomes actually emerged. Not what you hoped would happen, but what actually happened. This evidence informs what you should try next, turning your life into a systematic learning process rather than a series of disconnected attempts at improvement. And when reviewing monthly notes, ask yourself questions like, what themes connect then and now? Or which worries were unfounded? Sometimes the most revealing question is simply, what progress am I not seeing day to day? Now let's look at the annual horizon, or more of a long-term perspective. Well, the annual horizon reviews every instance of this date in your history, not just 1 year ago, but 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and beyond. So the longer you've been taking notes, the more of these you'll have. On November 28th, you'd review any notes written on November 28th of all previous years as far back as your notes extend. Now, this stacked perspective provides the clearest evidence of transformation across your entire documented history. You see who you were at each of these points versus who you are now, often discovering that the distance is far greater than you actually imagined. You recognize what seemed impossible 2 or 3 years ago that has become routine now, whether that's a skill you've mastered, a fear that you've overcome, or a life change that you've integrated so completely that you've forgotten it was once difficult. You also notice which problems that consumed your attention in previous years that have now completely dissolved, revealing how much of what feels permanent in the moment is actually really quite temporary. The annual distance also reveals cyclical wisdom that shorter time frames cannot capture. You begin to see what annual patterns recur in your life. The seasonal rhythms of energy, motivation, and challenge that repeat predictably. You understand how seasons affect your psychology, noticing whether you consistently struggle in winter, maybe you thrive in the spring, or you experience some summer differently than you expect. Well, you identify which challenges are actually periodic rather than perpetual, learning to distinguish between chronic issues requiring sustained attention and cyclical patterns requiring patient acceptance. But perhaps most powerfully, the annual review, or the review of your annual notes, provides concrete growth metrics across multiple years. You can trace In other words, how your skills have evolved year over year, seeing capabilities that have genuinely developed rather than just plateaued. You notice which relationships have deepened and which have naturally faded, understanding the trajectory of your connections over meaningful time. And you assess what capacity you've developed, not just what you can do now, but what you couldn't do at any of these earlier points that you now take for granted. So when reviewing annual notes, you need to consider, what would any of these previous versions of me think of current me? Or which struggles were actually growth? Sometimes the most profound question is simply, what wisdom have I gained across all these years? Well, here's an example of how I conduct my 3 horizon review each morning. Every morning I get up about 5 o'clock, 5:05 to be precise, lately. I come downstairs and I will open my daily note eventually. I do some reading first, some writing of morning pages, but eventually I will open my daily note. I will read my weekly horizon. I will look at all of the notes from a week ago. I have a query that pulls up all my week ago, month ago, and year ago notes. But in the weekly horizon, I'll scan for commitments and patterns. I'll look for any insights in today's note. Then I'll read the monthly notes. I'll look for project progress and themes. I'll try to connect that to current initiatives. Then I look at all the notes from a year ago and before, and I'll start to appreciate some growth and patterns. I'll start to extract some wisdom, hopefully, and apply some new knowledge to current situations. And then I'll try to write my daily note if I haven't already in my morning pages, and I will synthesize insights from all these horizons. I will write them and capture them in a note for the day that will eventually be reviewed in 1 week, in 1 month, and 1 year, and every year after that. And I'll try to set my intentions for the day. This is a whole cascading, snowballing activity that produces great dividends over the long haul. This whole thing in the morning, at least in terms of my reviewing my notes and writing my daily note, could take just 15 to 20 minutes max. So the key principle here for us to remember is that 3 time horizons create dimensional perspective on your life. And I've got one simple action for you today. If you have any past notes, I want you to take them, look at them today, and read the entries from exactly 7 days ago, 30 days ago, or at least if it's February 2nd, all February 2nds. If it's January 31st, look at all January 30, or look at 30 days ago, 31 days ago, and 365 days ago, 1 year ago. That's what I meant. So let's try this again. 7 days ago, 30 days ago, and 365 days ago. Take a look at those notes. If it's February 2nd, you might look at January 2nd. If it's February 2nd, you're going to look at February 2nd's note from last year and every year before that. You get it. You understand. A week ago, a month ago, and a year ago. Whatever you do, just do it consistently. But the mindset shift here needs to be, you need to move away from reviewing the past to this more active, proactive conversation where you are speaking with or having a conversation with previous versions of yourself, younger versions of yourself, and understanding more about who you are, where you've come from. And then that will help you to see where you're going and perhaps even to set the course to get somewhere that you want to be. This is the time horizons that have been helpful to me. This is, in a nutshell, my daily review practice. And I hope it will be helpful to you. If you'd like to read more about this, you can get a copy of my book, The Compounding Mind. Pre-pub copies are available for a limited time to those who subscribe to my newsletter at squaredawaylife.com/newsletter. Please join me there, and I hope to hear from you. My name is Cam Debussy. This has been the Squared Away Life podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.